And welcome back to Community Development Committee. Clerks, can we get a roll call, please?
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. Councillor Wong? Here. Councillor Chu?
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Dhaliwal? On the roll, Councillor Dhaliwal? Councillor Pootmans? Here. Councillor Walcott?
Here.
Councillor Carra?
I'm here.
Councillor Sharp? Councillor Barnes? Councillor Meehan?
I'm here.
Councillor Chabot?
Present.
Councillor Spencer?
Here.
Councillor McLean? Councillor McLean on the roll? Councillor Demong? Mayor Gondek?
Here.
And Chair Penner.
I am here.
Thank you, Chair.
We'll just check, if we could just put a note in the chat, clerks, just to remind those online that if they miss roll call, just to make a note of when they come back. We are moving on to panel 7. Robert Tremblay, Greg Miller, Brian Thiessen, Phillip Meintzner, and Frank Frey, if you all want to make your way over to the podium. Panel 8 is made up of Michael Jones, Rajdeep Kandola, Jeremy Barretto, Justin Simaluk, and Sonja Johnson. So those 5 people will be afterwards. It looks like you are all there. Robert, you are first. Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Robert Tremblay, and I'm the co-chair of the Calgary Climate Hub. As an organization, we are also a member of the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good. Today, we've already heard from a myriad of organizations and citizens asking you for one thing: approve the housing strategy completely. We've also seen survey results, a more representative data point than this public hearing, that show a vast majority of Calgarians support the full implementation of the housing strategy. I'd like to add more volume to that chorus and express Calgary Climate Hub's overwhelming support for the recommendations of the Housing and Affordability Task Force, especially the call for base RCG zoning and the removal of parking minimums. Calgary Climate Hub's vision is to make Calgary a leader in addressing the most critical crisis of our time: greenhouse gas-induced climate change. We took a step towards that with the passing of Calgary's climate strategy, but implementation requires a steadfast commitment to what was in the strategy. Today, we have an opportunity to implement a portion of the climate strategy if you are bold and brave, as Calgarians want you to be. Calgary's low density and resulting car dependency is a key driver of Calgary's carbon footprint. Indeed, 34% of Calgary's total emissions come from gasoline and diesel burned in vehicles. There are over 1 million internal combustion engine vehicles registered in Calgary today. To reach net zero, all of these will either need to be replaced with zero-emission vehicles or shifted over to other modes of transport. Vehicle electrification will be a necessary but incredible challenge in its own right. We need to build a city that allows for modes aside from private vehicles, or we will struggle to meet the goals Calgary committed to in its climate strategy. Expanding both choice and quantity of housing, especially in the existing city, where walking, cycling, and transit are the most viable, is a critical and proven strategy to decrease car use and ease our transition to a city with 100% zero carbon transportation. I'll just put some of what's in the climate strategy here just to demonstrate that okay, sounds good. Not as smooth as I was hoping for. But to demonstrate that what's proposed in the housing strategy is also in concert with what was proposed in the climate strategy. So we can see that H4.1, H4.2, and H4.3 all support what is proposed in the housing strategy. Reading out H4.2, through the land use bylaw update, enable increased housing types and support uses for residential areas to facilitate complete communities and reduce dependency on private vehicles. H4.3, consider viable options for removing and or reducing motor vehicle parking minimums in residential areas to allow for more compact development, more efficient use of land, and encourage alternate modes of transportation. To build a low-carbon city, we need to level the playing field on regulatory burden between development on the outskirts and inside the city. Right now, there is far too much red tape placed on development inside the city, and much of this stems from the micromanagement of development through a variety of low-density zones and varying parking minimums. Simplifying Calgary's zoning to allow for multi-family houses and eliminate parking minimums in the points below are especially critical to realizing the vision in Calgary's climate strategy. We thus strongly support the implementation of base RCG zoning and are disappointed to see the Housing and Affordability Task Force recommendations on the removal of parking minimums already watered down. Edmonton already removed parking minimums over 3 years ago. I don't understand why we need to be special and slow roll this in Calgary. I urge you to think of the broad cross-section of stakeholders that have called for these things. Again, supporting base RCG zoning and removal of parking minimums that you see before you today. Democracy does not mean listening to the vocal few, it means listening to everyone. Finally, on a personal note, just adding kind of some of my own context, I recently received notice that my rent was to go up 33%. Fortunately, I was able to negotiate it down to 22%, but I think this is still indicative of the crisis we're in. I want to live an affordable, low-carbon lifestyle that is available in Calgary's existing city. I don't want to have my housing choice limited to a small minority of housing stock around the edge of the city. We need housing built in the existing city so the folks who want to choose to live a lower carbon lifestyle can do so and do so affordably. So in conclusion, I urge you to pass the housing strategy, including with base RCG and the removal of parking minimums. The vast majority of Calgarians want and support you to do so please listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Greg, you are next.
Thank you. I'm Greg Miller. My wife and I are homeowners in Calgary, and I'm excited to speak with you today in support of these recommendations. What an incredible opportunity before you. Your yes vote will help to house Calgarians and cut red tape to support local businesses. We all agree on the problem. 2 weeks ago, 7 of you stated in a notice of motion that Calgary faces a serious housing shortage. You also said that one way to address this is with density increases in existing low-density districts. And good news. The city's own housing survey shows overwhelming support for building a variety of residential housing forms. Now, I get it. This feels like change. Change can feel uncomfortable until we live it. For example, in my 27 years here in Calgary, I've watched councillors move forward on many issues that made them uncomfortable. For starters, when I arrived here, there was no curbside recycling. Citywide composting was a dream. I watched some of you here twist yourself in knots over legalizing secondary suites. Other councillors agonized over building protected bike lanes and even making it safer to walk. I participated in the first local area plan for North Hill and the intense debate over the guidebook. More recently, you approved RCG and HGO, which made row houses a predictable land use. These all seem very contentious. Did it require leadership on the part of you and other councillors? Yes. Did other Canadian and American councillors face similar issues? Yes. Would we ever go back? No. Like those debates behind us, these housing recommendations respond to needs before us. And we are not alone. Edmonton, Vancouver, Toronto, Victoria, Drumheller, Minneapolis, the states of Oregon and California, Auckland, New Zealand, and so on, are just some of the jurisdictions taking similar measures for more housing choice. Right beside us in Cochrane, a more streamlined permitting and zoning process has contributed to housing prices about $40,000 less than those in Okotoks. Now, I grew up in a bungalow. My wife and I raised our kids mostly in a Calgary suburb. Now we live in a community with infills, row houses, suites, and yes, bungalows, exactly the mix of housing you'll enable with this strategy. And it's all good. Why does the Conservative Party support these recommendations? Maybe because they're business friendly. By passing this, you'll cut red tape and enable local builders to respond quickly to the needs of Calgarians. RCG will be the developed community's version of RG already found in our suburbs. But unlike new suburban growth, you are not being asked to risk billions in public spending up front on the pipes, the roads, the structures, the services, and the precious time needed before anything can be built. Approving RCG makes better use of what we already have while invigorating existing communities. Density increases in existing low-density districts is a rapid, agile, low-cost response to an urgent issue. It is fiscally conservative. Now, I've worked my entire career in the private sector in tech. I can tell you many software companies and their workers can locate wherever they want. By approving this strategy, you will ensure that Calgary remains a preferred destination for the spending and the tax revenues that come with these companies and their workers. Frankly, today's motion benefits all industries. When we provide housing options for all workers, all people across all wage categories, then our Calgary businesses will have the people they need to deliver the services we all need. Personally, I worry about where my children will live. Like past debates to recycle, to legalize secondary suites, or to build that first infill in a sea of bungalows, my children, our children, will look back on this debate to build the homes we desperately need right now and wonder, what was all the fuss about? One day, you will no longer be on council. When your friends, your family, your loved ones ask you what you did during this serious housing crisis, the housing shortage, this crisis, what will you say to them? Well, you could say that in September 2023, when it was most needed, I voted to make a difference. Housing is a human right. Please support it. Make a difference. Vote yes today. And thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Bryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Your Worship. My name is Bryan Thiessen. I'm here today speaking on behalf of Calgary Act Now, a group of Calgarians that include business professionals, not-for-profit advocates, students, and others who are united in our plea for immediate action to address the housing crisis in our city. We're here today at a time when, according to the City of Calgary, over 84,000 people, or 1/5 of households searching for a home to own or rent, cannot afford to do so. This crisis is not isolated to Calgary, but resonates across the country, capturing the attention of federal, provincial, and municipal governments alike. The province has actively campaigned to attract people to Alberta, claiming that housing is more affordable here than in provinces like Ontario. As such, we've seen a surge of people choosing to move to Calgary from other parts of the country and from across the world, which has only increased the strained housing supply. Knowing the challenges that lay ahead, Council assembled a task force of experts who provided 33 recommendations that will help us take action and alleviate the burden of this crisis. And Calgarians are now waiting on all of you to take decisive action. The members of our group echo the sentiments and fears of thousands who are struggling to afford housing. We urge Council to immediately adopt and implement the task force's recommendations and to continue progress on the work of these trusted experts. Council does not have the luxury of further delay. Recommendations that make it easier to build housing across the city, make more land available to build more housing across the city, and ensure more individuals have a safe place to call home would, any common sense Calgarian would think, be about as far from controversial as one could get. As representatives of the city, you possess both the power and the responsibility to take action. There are ongoing challenges with respect to provincial and federal government's role in addressing this crisis, but that does not mean that Council should delay action when there are sensible solutions available to you today. Your neighbors and your constituents urgently require your assistance. I know that I speak for the majority of Calgarians when I say, please treat this with the urgency it deserves. Pass all of the recommendations of the Housing and Affordability Task Force this week and take action to address the housing crisis facing Calgarians today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. Phillip.
Hello, City Council. My name is Phillip Meintzner, and I'm here today as a current resident of Englewood in Ward 9, but I grew up in Woodlands in Ward 13, and I'm here in support of the housing strategy. I'd like to start by saying that I don't want to buy a home, but I feel forced in that direction as my only means to secure stable long-term housing in this city. My wife and I are only considering buying as a way to escape a rental market where there's no limit on what can be charged for rent. I just want a secure and consistent place to live, and I'm trying to buy a home out of fear for the alternatives. I'm torn between two equally undesirable situations. On the one hand, we're currently renting the main floor of a single-family home in Inglewood, but I live in constant state of anxiety that my landlord is going to keep raising our rent or evict us when he eventually decides to sell the property, which he's already promised to do so. Which means that I feel pressured into purchasing a home against my will because it somehow feels safer than renting in a city with zero rent control. But my wife and I can't even manage to purchase a home. We make a combined $125,000 a year, and we've saved up a payment of nearly $130,000, and it's still been tough to purchase a home because all the homes we've bid on have sold for an average of $85,000 above the asking price. It's not like we're lowballing our offers. We just can't keep up with this market. Yeah, we could afford to buy a condo instead, but then we'd have to take on monthly maintenance and home association fees on top of already expensive mortgages, which just feels like paying double. So condos don't seem that much more affordable. Or we could look to buy a home further from the center of town, but public transit in Calgary is limited, and I don't want to commit to a lifetime of sitting in traffic, risking my safety in terrible weather to get to work, or paying for gas. I currently bike to work, and I'm trying to find a home that will allow me to keep doing so. But back to house hunting. Even if we managed to purchase a home and our offer had been accepted, it doesn't make things that much better because suddenly we now have $3,000 in monthly mortgage payments to pay off over the next 25 years. But again, somehow taking on that $3,000 in monthly payments feels like the safer option in some perverse way when my rent could literally double next year and I'd have to either pay it or find another place to live. Either option feels like a weird form of servitude. I'm either at the mercy of a bank or the mercy of a landlord. I just wish we had public alternatives like those that exist elsewhere around the world. I know that my wife and I are in a very privileged position to even consider buying a home because that option isn't available to many, and I worry for those who are worse off than we are, including family and friends of mine. Housing isn't an investment to me, it's a place to live. It's a use value as a home. It's not an exchange value as an asset. Calgary needs inner city density. We need to enable rapid redevelopment. We need rent controls. We need non-market housing options, and we need them quickly. I'm asking all of you to please support all of the task force recommendations and the housing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Phillip. Frank.
Chair Penner, Mayor Gondek, members of council, I'm feeling very inadequate standing up here, hearing a number of outstanding speakers. But I will continue, and I will hopefully keep it short and to the point. My name is Frank Frey. I live in Park Hill. I was born in the blown-up hospital. I've lived in 9 neighborhoods in Calgary, which gives me no special preference, but it does give me some experience. I've even lived on the other side of the river. I'm in strong support of the affordable housing proposal. We need more housing. We need a variety of housing types all over the city. We need to remove the tyranny of exclusionary zoning. I read in one of the updates on housing affordability 2022 that only 50% of our neighborhoods have any affordable housing. I found that shocking. I want my city to include housing for all types of people at all income levels. I was involved in developing a social care facility. I told the provincial government when they gave us our first check that while it was appreciated, it was insufficient. The new facility in Seaton, reflects the hard work of the Resolve campaign, but clearly we need more. We need non-market rental housing and more affordable housing measures. I've been sober for 20 years, and one paradigm that has helped me is the understanding of the circle of control. I have limited my comments to those measures that are in this council's circle of control. And I would also like to thank the members of the committee that developed these recommendations for their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. That is the panelists here. Councillor McLean, you are first in questions.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Mr. Thiessen. Are you there?
He's at the podium. Go ahead.
Yeah, Brian. Brian, you just said in your statement, in your presentation, that you know that the majority of Calgarians would agree with you. Just kind of interesting how you know that.
Well, I think that council experienced a little bit of that when the initial vote on this issue was rejected, and thousands of Calgarians spoke out on social media and otherwise. I've spoken with my neighbors. I've consulted with over 70 individuals in our action committee that represent not-for-profits, universities, businesses, and business associations. And the support is frankly unanimous. It is so I think it comes from evidence, from discussions I've had with my neighbors, my colleagues. I think that it frankly speaks for itself when you look across Canada and you have the two major political parties in Canada who agree on very little, both agreeing that the housing crisis is a national crisis. Every other city in Canada is coming up with actions such as removing blanket zoning. So I feel comfortable in my statement that the majority of Calgarians and Canadians support more affordable housing and the recommendations of the task force.
Well, thank you for that. I don't disagree. We all support more affordable housing, but I look at my inbox and I also kind of talk to my constituents, and I know there's, very mixed results. So just the last question would be: would you then support a plebiscite or a referendum on this issue going to a vote? And that would truly see how Calgarians feel.
Well, with respect, sir, I think that council was elected to make these tough decisions. I think a plebiscite is a cop-out, and frankly, I think you need to step up and do what your constituents elected you to do and vote forward your expert task force's recommendations.
Okay, I'm not here to combat or argue. I think plebiscites are a good form of democracy. That's kind of what votes are about. But thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you, and I apologize if that seemed combative, but I believe that elected representatives should represent their constituents.
Wonderful. There are no more questions of this panel. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Panel 8 is all remote. I'm going to call you all in just a second. I'm just going to call out panel 9. I see that everyone should be here in person. So David Cumming, Shawn Clendining, Joel Tiedemann, Shifrah Gadamsetti, and Jason Unsworth are on panel 9, and you're in person and you're after. So panel 8, you're all online. I'm going to call you slowly because it takes a bit. If you can just indicate if you are online. Michael Jones.
I am here, thank you.
Okay. Rajdeep Kandola. Okay. Jeremy Barretto. Justin Simaluk.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and Sonja Johnson. Okay. And I had two other people who I had called earlier. Elisa Youngins. Still not here. Mohammed Lada. Okay, still not here. Of panel 9 who I called, David, Shawn, Joel, Shifrah, and Jay. I see Shif. Yeah, 1, 2. Okay, so I'm going to slide you into this panel. So we're going to go Michael and Justin, who I heard, and then we will go to Joel and to Shif, and then we'll come back and loop around. Okay, so Michael, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Michael Jones, and I'm speaking to you today remotely, both as representative of the Smalta Community Association, but also as a fellow representative in this very messy journey we call city building. I'm a little blown away at the quality and power of previous panels of the engaged citizens who care very deeply.
Michael, I'm just going to pause you. Sorry, Michael, I'm just going to pause you for 1 second. It sounds like we have one other person on the line who's not muted. So just if you are on the line, can you just make sure you're muted if you are not, Michael? Okay, sounds better. Keep going. I'm so sorry about that.
It's all good. Welcome to Remote Still here. Anyway, thank you so much to the previous presenters for all the clear facts they laid out. It meant I could cut out a whole bunch and actually come in under time. Because I do so very enjoy them, in the words of Arlo Guthrie, the charts, the graphs, and the paragraphs in the back of each one. What I do want to use my time today is to reiterate we need committee and subsequently council on Saturday to pass today's proposal in its spiritual entirety. I look forward to the amendments and wish to mention our support already for the ones such as the ones that Mayor Gondek publicized last night. I do feel the need to remind everyone that these recommendations were put together by a panel of experts telling us what we as a city can and need to do to address this crisis. Of the items specifically in today's proposal, there are 3 actions I want to expressly call out our support of because they help our community and our city. One is looking at changing the base zoning to RCG because this is going to support evolution in our city. RCG is going to give us a choice. It's also going to spread the development around so it does not feel so concentrated. Exploring the removal of parking minimums and accepting the reality that the market is going to take care of this. The other one is the actions that are placed there to bring other levels of government to do their job and create substantially more non-market housing and rental stock. As evidence, we saw a letter published this morning confirming that federal dollars are contingent on removing exclusionary zoning, and just a handful of hours ago, some details revolving around removing GST from rental buildings and such for new ones. The other point I do want to make, which is not directly related to this, but is the follow-up steps, I do want to remind council to please continue supporting programs like the established area growth and change strategy, as well as the local area plans for identifying and investing in amenities to handle our growth. For some background, Sonalta is just west of downtown and the Beltline, with a notably lower than average household income and a rental rate of greater than 70%. Later this year, we hope to see our population increase by roughly 10% as the first phase of a purpose-built rental building completes. Literally across the street in the Beltline, we're going to see more than that opening up within the next 18 months, directly affecting the requirement of amenities and improving the viability of commercial spaces along our main streets and in our community as a whole. The thing is, we know that this is not nearly enough, both in terms of housing and, again, as a general reminder that we want the city to walk the walk, ensuring that amenities and density are going to happen together. This is also part of our nuanced reasons that we support a simplification of the base residential land use to RCG. Sonalta specifically, we also have a large number of lots with land use designations from the 1980s. Simplifying this is going to make redevelopment of our area significantly less confusing. It also means that when redevelopment is going to happen in our community, it's going to meaningfully increase the chance of seeing affordable housing options happen when a redevelop happens. This is where I did have a lot more that I thankfully trimmed for time, thanks to Nathan Harlock's technical answers and slides to Councillor Meehan and Walcott. And I think we've got someone echoing. All right, the echo's gone. Like the change to other communities to allow RC2 broadly done decades ago, a rezone to RCG will continue an organic and steady evolution spread more evenly across the city instead of being overly concentrated in the least risky parcels. We know our growth in our outskirts is not enough, and nor is it sustainable. As the report states, we owe it to our fellow Calgarians and future Calgarians to support an increase in 1,000 extra folks finding housing per year as part of a many-pronged solution. Our community association also wished to specifically call out the removal of parking minimums. Developers have been clear to us that they are interested in building to the site and providing what they feel the market is asking for. In our experience with the fact that we have an LRT station, this has always meant that there's significantly more parking provided than was absolutely necessary given the relaxations. Lastly, and thankfully the least contentious item that we've noticed today in the public hearing is, and that we are very extremely supportive of, are all of the actions to support non-market housing. We've heard significant stories already today. Housing is a human right. It's a big deal. We wish very earnestly to see everyone who needs housing able to get safe, secure, and affordable housing. So, thank you. And in closing, I want to reiterate, we need council to plan to pass today's proposal. The adage, when is the best time to plant a tree and such. At minimum, follow the recommendation because this is to make the work plan. I look forward to coming and talking to you all in a public hearing, talking about, well, what does the actual implementation of RCG everywhere look like? What does it mean removing parking minimums? Let's have a work plan instead of the plan to do that. Continue supporting programs like the Established Area Growth and Change Strategy and the local area plans.
Thanks, Michael. Sorry, your time is up, and I've given you a few extra seconds. I thought you were going to wrap up, and then you just kept going.
And have a good one.
Okay.
City Census, thank you.
So just, Michael, stay on the line. Just mute yourself. And then if there's questions, we can come back to you. Justin, you are next.
Hello, Mayor Gondek and members of committee. I'm Jocelyn Simaluk, and I had a bit of a different presentation written out until I read almost the 600 pages of public submissions, the responses to the city survey, and council today, quite frankly. And right now, I see councillors who are looking at short-term political gains with a small percentage of the population while damning an entire generation of current and future Calgarians. I'm going to say this again because it can't be said enough, but let's look back to the 1959 Toronto Metropolitan Plan about what it says in regards to detached homes. Low-density areas do not generate sufficient traffic to support public transportation. As long distances to shops and other community facilities become excessive for walking, the residents rely more and more on the use of the private automobile. The cost of overextended systems of streets, sanitary services, and other utilities must ultimately be borne by the residents in increased housing costs, taxes, and local improvement charges. Trying to preserve the status quo of detached housing under the false impression of community character is crippling our city's affordability and delivery of services. We've known this growth pattern is a problem for decades. How we build housing now is also a direct action to how we combat climate change. If you're for taking action on climate change, a position that goes against upzoning and parking completely contradicts this. Councillor Sharp made comments on June 6th about taking emotions out of this debate. Perfect. Things like worrying about parking are absolutely emotional responses. Anybody suggesting chaos will ensue by removing parking minimums is working on feels over reals. Saying things like Calgarians will always need to drive greatly undermines the goals of the MDP and the CTP, which are supposed to be for reducing driving, not maintaining it. We know factually, not emotionally, that parking is a major contributing factor to vehicle trips generated and vehicle ownership. It also creates a massive burden on people wanting to buy a home. Maybe I'm a masochist, but I listen to the entire guidebook public hearing again. I listen to people question if we need simplified zoning, if we can delay these decisions, or if we're really in a housing crisis. How wrong they were. I listened to some of those presenters who are now sitting around this horseshoe as city councillors trying to do the exact same thing 1 week ago. Right now, we're not leaders. This engagement is being used to help some councillors feel better about voting no on RCG and parking while trying to water down recommendations and patting their own backs, even though an overwhelming majority of Calgarians want these recommendations as is. That is not leadership. Some of you are probably thinking about how this decision will impact your re-election chances, maybe even mayoral aspirations. Maybe Elbow Park or Briar Hill or University Heights might not donate as much to your campaign. But if you claim to be serious about affordability and you still aren't actively working towards eliminating single detached zoning and parking minimums, you're not serious about affordability. You asked for expert recommendations and you got them, only now you're afraid to follow through, so you want an off-ramp. There's people on this council who are more concerned about the voices of those who already own homes and are object to change because they feel like they should be excluded from living beside somebody in an RCG home. Shameful. There are people on this council who are more concerned about where vehicles will live than where people will live. Shameful. There's people on this council who don't give a damn about the well-being of this city and just want to parrot garbage political talking points without having to take action on anything, talking a big game about reducing red tape or moving at the speed of business, but they certainly don't like actions or following through on that talk. Some might think of them as disruptors. Shameful. different housing types and uses can get along with each other. So I'm over this fear of blanket zoning. I want quilt zoning. I want a mishmash of everything so people have more choices about how to raise a family or start a business, not just being forced towards single detached houses, driving vehicles, and leaving communities they've established roots in. You can't tell me you agree with these recommendations, but then want to pick it apart because literally two are making you uncomfortable. So please accept all the recommendations as is and show some leadership that Calgarians need. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Again, I will just get you to hold on the line and mute. Shif, you are next.
Can I speak in this mic, or is it just this one? Just this one. Okay, lovely. All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mayor Gondek, members of council. My name is Shifrah Gadamsetti, and I come before you today to speak in support of the recommendations in the city's housing strategy. My family and I immigrated to Canada in 2001, and I have proudly called Calgary home ever since. While it took a long time for my family to feel financial stability, my parents were still able to scrape by and build a life of meaning because we had a place to call home. When I reflect on the person that I have become today, I cannot help but tie it to the growth and transformation of our amazing city over the last decade. I remember jelly bean dances at the community center, first dates, family picnics in our public parks, and losing entire afternoons reading in a sunbeam at the public library. And all of these experiences were available to me because my family wasn't struggling, as many are today, to find a home or to belong to a community. Despite financial challenges, it was still possible to pay for a teen bus pass, cover the rent and eventually the mortgage, and occasionally splurge on a pair of nosebleed tickets to a Flames game. Even programs like the low-income bus pass, even with programs like that, families today are forced to choose between food and rent, and they have no room to consider additional recreational activities. My days as a student were full of amazing memories with my roommates because working and student loans allowed us enough funding to share the cost of rent. Today, students are maxing out their loans and compromising their education to work more, and they still cannot afford a place to live. In more recent years, my milestones and my memories are weaved in to the growing number of public programs, places and spaces that support arts, culture, entertainment, and everything else that makes up the social fabric of our city. I have a deep sense of ownership in the success of this city because it has helped me become the person that I am today. And I believe that any person who chooses to live here and should also have access to the support and the opportunities that helped me and my family thrive. I continue to enjoy many of these experiences because I am fortunate enough to afford the place that I call my home. And because councillors who have preceded you have chosen to invest in building many of the things and the amenities that I enjoy as well. Thus far, I am grateful for investments in public transit, economic development, and many of the social programs that are geared towards supporting our most vulnerable. As stewards of the public purse, I trust that the decisions made here, even ones that I don't necessarily agree with, are always rooted in inherent belief that they are benefiting Calgarians. Voting against these recommendations will not benefit anyone. Without affordable and diverse housing options, I fear that all of these past investments will become futile over time. We are less likely to work, to study, to plant roots in a city where the cost of housing strains our budget and undermines the overall quality of life. As my parents and in-laws age, I worry about their ability to live comfortably or to age in place. I think about our options and how my partner and I can accommodate their needs without compromising their dignity. I think about whether we'll be able to afford to. Supporting these recommendations before you is critical to fostering a resilient, prosperous, and inclusive future for our city. It empowers us to build housing that is diverse enough to meet the needs of our diverse population. It will spur economic growth and it will stabilize investment in our communities. It will allow young families to plant roots, for their kids to go to their own jelly bean dances, for seniors to age in place, and for students to live with a roof over their heads instead of out of their cars. Increasing our housing supply will increase safety, it will provide stability, and it will offer dignity to so many Calgarians who are currently going without any of that. There are real-time and costly consequences to inaction, and those are driven by the desperation of survival. I won't repeat what many of the speakers before me have listed today as the dire consequences of being unable to afford a home, but I agree with them. Delaying action at this time is not just inconvenient, but it will be devastating to many. I've had the privilege of working for a member of council, and I have witnessed how challenging it can be for you as stewards of this city to balance the diverse needs of Calgarians and to effectively represent your constituents. Thankfully, the decision before you today is free of those complications. It is truly a simple one. Voting in favor of these recommendations is not merely supporting a policy decision or a tool. It is taking meaningful action on a moral imperative. We are counting on you to do the right thing and act in the best interests of Calgarians who have put their trust in you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shif. From far away, gentleman in the vest, I thought you were Joel, but you're not Joel now that I see you closer. What's your name, sorry? Shawn. Okay, Shawn, I'm going to put you on this panel. Jay, I see you sitting there. I'm going to put you on the next panel. And then, Jeremy, are you online now?
My name is Rajdeep. I missed my cue to say I'm online.
Okay, Rajdeep, if you can just hold for 1 second, and I'm going to put you on the next panel, so just stay there. Jeremy, are you on the phone line? Not yet. Okay, Sonja? Okay, not. Okay, Shawn, come on up. We're going to hear from you, then we'll conclude this panel, and then I'll just reconstitute a new panel, so go ahead.
I'll try to keep mine short here. Hello, my name is Shawn Clendining, and I'm a proud resident of Ward 8. Calgary has been home for most of my life, with a brief period spent in Europe and on the Atlantic coast of Canada for my education. My roots run deep in this city, especially in my childhood neighborhood of Midnapore, Ward 14. It's where I made countless cherished childhood memories. I often dream of returning to my childhood neighborhood with my partner and starting a family. Unfortunately, this aspiration feels increasingly distant due to the current affordability crisis and the unproductive suburban development practices that have taken root in Midnapore. Surprisingly, Montreal has become a more affordable option than Calgary, eroding the traditional Albertan advantage. Consequently, my partner and I are now considering a move to the City of Saints, where more effective and economically productive development strategies have enabled them to manage the affordability issues better. It's disheartening to see that many of my friends who also grew up in Ward 15 are facing the same dilemma, and some have already made the difficult decision to relocate. The narrative has shifted from families from the east moving to Calgary to us contemplating a move in the opposite direction, and that's a cause for concern. I wholeheartedly endorse our Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations. These proposals offer a hope to help keep Albertans in Alberta, ensuring that our beloved province remains a viable and affordable place for all of its residents to thrive. This is the end of my submissions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shawn, for being with us here today. So, committee, I will just remind you, it is Michael, Justin, Shifrah, and Shawn who were on this panel. I'm going once, twice, 3 times for questions. I don't see any. Thank you to the 4 of you for being online and for being here today. Okay, we are going to call for the next panel. Rajdeep, are you online on the phone with us still?
Yes, I'm still here, yeah.
Okay, you will be first. Jeremy, are you here? We'll still wait. Shawn? No, I just had Shawn, sorry. Sonja. Okay, David Cumming. Jay Unsworth. Is Joel here? Joel Tiedemann? Not yet.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you're online?
Yeah, I'm on the line.
Okay. And then in person, do I have Rowan Wiebe? Bryan Weismiller, I'll put you in this panel too, so come on over. Okay, so just so we know for order, it is going to go Rajdeep, David, Joel, Jay, Bryan. Rajdeep, go ahead, you have 5 minutes.
My name is Rajdeep Kandola, and I am a family doctor here in Calgary. I'm speaking in favor of changing the base residential zoning to RCG and to remove minimum parking requirements in all residential districts. These changes are necessary for those aspiring to have a home, but they are also necessary for those who already have a home, including those who have decided to speak out against these changes. The benefits of density flow to all of us. As a family doctor, there are moments in which I have to tell an elderly patient that their mental and physical health no longer allows them to operate a car safely. I am ethically required to inform the Ministry of Transportation of this. These conversations between family physicians and patients result in intense disagreement and frustration. Surveys show over half the time the patient will never come back to see that doctor again. In some cases, these are doctors they had for decades, doctors who they trusted with their health and that of their families, who they confided in when they were at their lowest. Why such an intense reaction to losing a driver's license? Because in our society, losing access to your car means losing access to your independence. We have made things this way. In great cities with density like London or Paris or Tokyo, elderly folks can walk to their grocery store or hair salon or pharmacy or doctor. They don't need a driver's license to live their life. Think also about this. We are building a city in which your kids and grandkids will not be able to afford to buy a house in your neighborhood. The result will be social isolation for our current homeowners as they age. This will come for all of us. As a physician, I am required to inform my patients about the consequences of their decisions. Counselors are leaders and representatives, so please inform your constituents of the consequences of their positions. For the sake of slightly more convenient parking, they will eventually lose their independence and become socially isolated from their younger family. If you are against red tape or in favor of property rights, allow landowners to use their property as they wish. A recent paper suggested that land use regulations cost the average U.S. worker $9,000 in income. That's real red tape. Allowing density allows people to live near the jobs most suited to them. If you want lower spending and taxes, then vote for these changes. Studies show that government services for an infill housing unit cost half as much as for a new home in the suburbs. Please do not follow the failed policies of Toronto and Vancouver. We don't want their problems. I know you feel political pressure to vote against these changes, but consider that it's not just the lowest income folks who are now struggling. Entire new generations are becoming increasingly cynical about their housing hopes. The political tide is turning, and this gives you the opportunity to make significant positive change. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajdeep, for being here with us today. Just hang on the line and mute, and if there's any questions for you, we will come to those in just a few speakers. David, you are next.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. My name is David Cumming. I'm born and raised Calgarian, lived in the city my entire life, but for a brief stint at school. In my career, I practiced law. I'm a litigation and condominium lawyer, but I'm here before you simply because I've taken an interest in my city and urban planning in particular, and I recently joined an organization called Strong Towns for no other reason that I find their arguments compelling and applicable to the city of Calgary. And so firstly, I just want to commend the task force and council for what I think are excellent recommendations that I urge you to adopt. I think this is a real opportunity to move Calgary forward, to become the city that it perhaps should have been 50 years ago and can be in the future. Sharing just a few brief principles from the organization Strong Towns, which is an organization that analyzes cities and recommends changes and to make them more economically viable and economically sustainable, specifically so that the replacement cost and maintenance cost of infrastructure is properly funded by the property taxes that a city creates. The first principle I think that is reflected in these recommendations is that no community should experience radical change, but no community should be exempt from change. I think that means that each community needs to be allowed to move to its next integral step of development. And if we unduly limit where certain types of housing are allowed to be built, then we are inviting radical change. Because law of supply and demand, if you're only allowed to build a certain type of housing in very few isolated areas, then those areas are going to have more change and more of that particular type of housing. Very quickly, I'd also like to address, as the caller did before me, the minimum parking requirements. I do realize that there was a move to remove minimum parking requirements for commercial districts. I commend Council for adopting that. I think that was an excellent decision. I think that the same should be done for residential. I did notice that there was amendment in the removal to from simply a blanket removal for all residential to ensure minimum parking requirements do not act as a barrier to affordability. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but my question would be if a developer or if a resident wants to go car free or car light and wants to design their lifestyle around that or market the building to individuals who would do that, why would we make it illegal for them to do it? But my question, I suppose, for council is on this point of minimum parking is if this change is enacted, and I do urge you to enact this change, what realistic effect do you think it would have? Are we actually going to see new buildings pop up that have that are below the current minimum parking standards? And I do this because there's a recent PhD thesis. It's called Urban Intercurrents from Tristan Cleveland out of Halifax. And again, this is not my area, but the findings are basically that if you remove minimum parking requirements and do some zoning changes without expanding the land area where people can walk for their daily needs, you won't have much effect. So I commend council and I commend the task force for these recommendations, but I would urge you to say that this is only the first step. And it's a recognition that affordability includes not just housing costs, but housing and transportation costs. Those are the two biggest costs that any individual or family will face. And they need to be considered together. And so we continue to build communities that have car-centric design, where the only reasonable option is for people to have to buy a vehicle or two vehicles for a family in order to function, then we're not going to see the sort of changes that this report, I think, in removing these parking requirements, might have envisioned. And taking the strong towns approach, that would be to observe where people in the community are struggling, observe how it is difficult for them to go car free or car light, identify the next small change that we can make, whether that be putting in benches at bus stops, trees to make the sidewalks more pleasant, protected bike lanes. Do that change, and then repeat the process. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, David, for being here with us today. Joel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of council. My name is Joel Tiedemann, and I'm the Director of Development at Certis Developments. While I am also a member of Calgary Planning Commission, I'm speaking to you today in my capacity as a citizen of Calgary. Calgary is at a significant inflection point. In Q4 of 2022 alone, approximately 15,000 new residents moved to Calgary, while there were only 5,500 units available on the market. This accounts for unoccupied, for rent, and for sale homes. This 9,500 unit deficit shows that the current demand for housing far exceeds supply, and this deficit will only continue to grow if not properly addressed. As with any market, as demand starts to significantly outpace supply, pricing goes up, which means a reduction in affordable housing options in our city. This is no more evident than when we look at rental data across the country that shows rental rates are rising fastest in Calgary at over 15% year over year. With a projected increase in Calgary's population of over 100,000 people by 2027, we need to act now. Based on the Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations, Council can take meaningful actions now that will make a real difference to the volume of housing supply and will have a direct impact on housing affordability. As an active member of Calgary's development community, I would encourage Council to implement all of the recommendations of the task force. There is no singular silver bullet that will solve this issue. It will take a concerted, coordinated effort to ensure everything that can be done is done to maintain and improve housing affordability in our city. Modifications to process and policy at the municipal level will have the most immediate impact, but it should also be recognized that collaboration with provincial and federal levels of government will also be required. Many of the recommendations in the task force report will result in a significant and immediate impact on housing supply and affordability in Calgary. These recommendations thoughtfully identified items that will seek to provide direct funding and advocacy toward housing programs, free up underutilized city-owned land to be used for housing developments, identify collaboration opportunities to deliver more housing more rapidly, seek to remove barriers in order to move affordable housing units through the approvals process more expeditiously, and probably most controversially, will reset the base residential district in our land use bylaw to permit higher density housing everywhere using the base condition of RCG. Just this past May, Toronto City Council made development of 4-unit projects on single lots as of right across the city. That change was brought about by crippling housing affordability crisis in the city and is a centerpiece of the city's housing action plan. Real and meaningful change must occur in Calgary, or the cost of housing will continue to climb. Calgary should not wait until we are in a situation as dire as the GTA before we take a bold yet logical step like this. The base residential district in new suburban communities is already RG, which allows for the development of single-family homes, duplexes, and townhomes on the same lot. If we truly want to make an impact on the volume of housing units delivered into the market, we should expand these same permissions into our established communities. There has been a lot of talk about this step potentially excluding the public from the decision-making process. However, even if we set the base residential district across the city to RCG, development permits will still be required prior to the commencement of any project, and all citizens are able to comment on proposed developments. Implementation of this recommendation is in no way circumventing democracy. All landowners would still require the desire, the capital, and the appropriate permits before completing any new projects under the RCG land use. This change will not result in townhomes springing up everywhere overnight. There is still plenty of process in place that will ensure the appropriate review and delivery of projects. Changing the base district across the city will simply remove 10 months or more from the approval process and will allow interested parties to deliver much-needed housing into the market more quickly. We are serious about making a commitment to housing affordability. We need to make concrete moves that will make housing more efficient to deliver. I also believe that recommendation 1E2, make dwelling units in a multi-residential land use district permitted use to enable simplified approvals process, is critically important. The result would be the immediate simplification and streamlining of the development approval process for housing without any negative impact to Calgarians. Single-family housing is already a permitted use in new suburban communities, and dwelling units are permitted use in the recently adopted HGO district. It is time to do this for all residential uses. Why have residential stock districts where the use we are trying to encourage is not permitted? In Edmonton, the recent adoption of their revised land use. Yeah.
I know that you are going to respect the timer and your time is up, so thank you for presenting.
Okay. All good.
Just hang on the line, and if there are questions, we will come back to you. Jay, you are next.
Good afternoon, Mayor Gondek, Chair Penner, honorable members of City Council, fellow Calgarians, and community leaders. My name is Jay Unsworth, and I'm a resident of Southwest Calgary who wishes to speak about the recommendations put forward by the Housing and Affordability Task Force. I'm here because I deeply care about my fellow citizens and the future of our city, and I believe the decisions made in this room will impact generations to come. We're at a crossroads of who we want to be as a city moving forward. City Council has two choices in front of them. Option one is a path towards progress, growth, and a greater city. It's about prioritizing the needs of all of our citizens. It's about building a Calgary where everyone has a decent place to call home. By moving forward with the housing strategy being discussed today, we commit to creating a city that thrives on opportunity and acknowledges that housing is not a luxury, but a necessity. It's not a cost, it's an investment in our future. A future that will continue to see Calgary grow regardless of what direction this committee takes. With my business hat on, increasing our housing supply creates jobs, helps communities grow, supports local business, and gives people choice on where they live. With my neighbor hat on, stable housing makes neighborhoods safer by creating a sense of community and providing a secure environment for families where neighbors look out for neighbors. I remember when Calgarians looked after Calgarians. I wish that for my daughter and future generations. I firmly believe we should leverage the great work of the Housing Task Force, who gave us well-informed, tangible solutions to our housing challenges. I'm not here to say that every action item be implemented, but I am firmly in support of all the recommendations and diving into the feasibility of each one in our unique context. Option 2 is a path of inaction, where we allow the status quo to persist. It's a choice to ignore the pressing housing issues that countless Calgarians face every single day. By choosing this path, we effectively turn a blind eye to the suffering of our neighbours. Calgary Economic Development found that 95% of Calgarians can't afford 60% of the homes in this city. Think about that. Let's also think about the 2023 Housing Needs Assessment, which states that nearly 1 in 5 households in Calgary cannot afford their housing. Think about our seniors, the ones who built this great city, who are on fixed incomes. This is not how I wish to thank them. Doing nothing means perpetuating the struggles of those who are forced to make impossible choices between rent and groceries and higher education and employment opportunities. It means pushing the dream of home ownership further out of the reach for Calgarians who deserve an opportunity to pave their own way. I want to be clear, the consequences of inaction are not abstract. They are real, and they affect real people's lives. It means families living in uncertainty, children missing out on opportunities, and in some cases going without food, and communities suffering from the lack of investment and pride. The negative consequences are enormous. I implore you to feel the weight of this decision in your hearts. This isn't only about statistics, policies, or ideology. It's about real people, our neighbors, and their struggles. It's about providing opportunities for our kids to realize their dreams and reach their full potential. The consequences of your choice today will impact the lives of our fellow Calgarians far into the future. Please remember that housing is a shared responsibility among all 3 levels of government. It's a call to action that we must answer together. It's an opportunity to show decency in the face of one of the most pressing challenges of our time. It's time to make a choice that will define the legacy of this City Council. Let's embrace the housing recommendations that will pave the way for a greater city. Let's build a Calgary that stands as a beacon of progress, compassion, and opportunity. In closing, I ask you to vote with your hearts and your conscience to support all Calgarians in having food, clothing, and a safe and secure place to call home. Please be the leaders Calgarians need and support this housing strategy, and let's move forward together. I really want to thank you for your time. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. Bryan.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak in favor of the expert housing strategy. My name is Bryan Weismiller, and I'm speaking for myself as a resident of Woodlands in Southwest Calgary. And I decided to speak at City Hall when I read a social media post from my city councillor. It described zoning reform as, quote, the destruction of our single-family communities. And, as a homeowner in one of those so-called single-family communities, I got to tell you, I really resented that remark. I couldn't disagree more with the premise that increasing the variety of housing is a bad thing. It's a good idea. I want to see more housing options in my neighborhood, not fewer. I trust that the recommendations and the actions from the expert panel, including legalizing density, will be a benefit to established communities. By now, and I know it will continue, we've heard a strong case that the housing strategy will make life better for Calgarians in so many different ways. From increasing affordability, sustainability, to boosting community development and economic growth. It gives families access to established communities like mine, where there are great schools, and bringing more people into the community will help breathe some life into the small businesses that are struggling right now in communities like Woodlands. Obviously, that's all good and important stuff, but at its very core, this housing strategy is about something even bigger than any of those things individually. It's about giving us the right to choose where and how we live. It's not just about housing, it's about freedom of choice. It's about a city that accepts the individual and the collective will of its people. And I think in contrast, our current zoning laws have done nothing but limit our housing options. Restrictive zoning has driven up the cost of housing, as many people have made the point today, in our city by limiting supply. It's really become a tool to dictate the shape and the so-called character of our communities. I'm just frankly tired of it. These are outdated norms, and they do nothing but prolong the housing crisis. I did some reading, and I learned that Edmonton had effectively eliminated single-family zoning. They've done it slowly, and it's kind of flown under the radar. And I wonder, like, why can't we? After all, I think restrictive zoning is one of the most Calgary things that we could do. You know, we talked this good game about our city's entrepreneurial spirit. We're supposed to be this community of creators and innovators and pioneers. But if that is true, why would we confine ourselves to one-size-fits-all housing in 60% of our footprint? You know, if we're so open for business, why would we stop housing construction in the areas where there's demand? And if we're the city of builders, why would we artificially throttle the supply of housing? You know, to me, none of this makes any sense at all. By embracing a more flexible and inclusive approach to zoning, we can choose to build communities that reflect our own unique needs. I love my house. I think it's a real privilege that I get to own one, but it also doesn't mean I want to live there forever. Now, I want a range of housing that meets our unique and changing needs as a family. Last week, I went to view a Century home that was up for sale. It was unique. It had a laneway house in the back that I thought would be perfect for my aging parents. And the sellers wanted $800,000 for this property that, you know, in my estimation, was not worth nearly that amount. And that's like one of the cheaper types of arrangements we've seen to this extent. And the reason they can charge a premium is because they've jumped through all of the hoops that exist. They've come here through city council. I just think it's an example of how our current zoning rules create winners and losers. And it's time to level the playing field for everybody's benefit. Ending restrictive zoning is only part of the solution, obviously. And that's why I'm supporting the whole suite of reforms contained in the housing strategy. Zoning reform isn't a magic bullet, as people have said. It's a step in the right direction. But what it's not is destructive. You know, if you truly believe that turning bungalows into duplexes is an act of annihilation, I think you should probably sit down before we start talking about wildfires and floods, because that is going to blow your mind. In conclusion, it's time to take action. I hope that you will listen to the people that you represent, the people in the room here today and online. I hope that you'll allow us to find the housing we both want and need. Thank you for your time today. Please vote in favor of the housing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan, for being here with us today. I'm not seeing questions. I actually have one for Jay. Jay, if I'm not mistaken, you ran for council in Ward 13, correct?
I did, yep.
And just picking up on something that Bryan said, are you aware of any communities or neighborhoods in Ward 13 that are exclusively zoned RC1?
I am not familiar with that, but I have talked to literally thousands of my neighbors who are in favor of this. I know Councillor McLean asked a previous question about how, I believe he asked Brian Thiessen how he knew some of the stats. I don't have specific numbers for you, but I have talked to people day in, day out. It's a passion area of mine. Councillor Penner, you asked a question earlier to a group about what defines their community, and what defines my community is the diversity, the people, my neighbors, the kids selling lemonade at the park. But more importantly, what I've started to notice is some of our businesses closing down. They can't afford it. When I talk about my neighborhood doesn't have good transit. It doesn't have good walkability. These are the things that we need to invest in. We need to understand the difference between a cost and an investment. And if we solely look at things as a cost, I think it's short-sighted and I think it's irresponsible. Investments have a payoff. I challenge this council to think about beyond the next 3, 4, 5 years. What does Calgary look like in 20 years? What does that map look like? How do we get there? I mean, to quote a Seinfeld episode, it's like tipping a pop machine. We're not going to do it all in one rock. It takes time. It takes purpose. It takes commitment. And it takes the people in this room to do the right thing for all of our citizens. It's important to me, and it should be important to you.
But don't tip pot machines or porta potties. Okay, I have no
definitely
further...
not porta potties.
Yeah.
Pot machines.
I mean, maybe admin can work on actually finding out how many communities or neighborhoods, you know, the 200 plus have only RC1 as zoning. And I don't need that answer now, but just Interesting. Okay, I don't have any further questions for you. There might be others. Councillor Chabot, you're next.
Thank you. My question is for Mr. Tiedemann. Mr. Tiedemann, you mentioned that at a development permit stage, all Calgarians could actually weigh in on the development permit, but that's not actually true. Not all Calgarians can weigh in on development permits. There's limitations as to who's allowed to actually comment on those in the MGA as far as proximity. So could you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Yeah, sorry, you are correct, Councillor Chabot. But when a development permit goes through the review stage, an applicant is required to put up a sign on the property that kind of gives all the neighbors indication in terms of like what might go there, who they can contact if they have any issues. Now, typically admin, and if the file were to go to somewhere like SDAB, they only look at commentary from immediate neighbors or anybody who might be impacted. What I was getting at is that anybody in the city has the ability to comment on a development permit, I guess, if it's within an area that would impact them.
Okay, so permitted and discretionary follow the same rules as far as advertisement is concerned on the development permit? Notice posting on site?
That would be a question for admin. I don't know the answer to that right off the top of my head.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your submission today. No further questions.
Okay. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Since I was brought into this, I'm going to just ask Mr. Unsworth a question. You said you've spoken to neighbors. Have you spoken to the community associations across the ward?
No, I talked to the people directly, Councillor McLean. I go hang out in my local park. I go to the local businesses and I converse with them directly. The people that actually live in Ward 13, yeah.
Yeah, I actually do as well. Got a letter this morning from Shawnee Evergreen Community Association, which I think maybe you or Brian might live in, but I'll just read it real quick. It says, Dear Mayor Gondek and councillors, on behalf of the Shawnee Evergreen Community Association, I'm writing today to express our concerns with one of the recommendations in the Calgary Housing Strategy. Opening up the rezoning of any neighborhood anywhere in the city is not change that we support. Homeowners have a
Councillor McLean, Councillor McLean, do you have a question?
Well, my question was to be talking to people. Of course, I do talk to them as well. But okay, I'll move to another question. I'm just saying I talk to all the community associations and they support, I guess, my vision. And we run together, Mr. Unsworth, would you say, on completely different visions and platforms?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
I said, would you agree that when you ran, we both ran for the Ward 13 seat, that we ran on pretty diverse or opposite platforms?
So, Councillor McLean, that is not what Mr. Unsworth presented on today. I asked him a question about Councillor McLean. I asked him a question about his awareness of the ward. We are not here to have a rehash a debate that you and Mr. Unsworth had 2 years ago, and you won. You're here now. So if you have questions, with respect to his presentation and with respect to housing, please go ahead and ask those.
Now, respectfully, you brought it up and brought it in, so I won't go any further, but you're right, yeah. It was a pretty big win. Thank you.
There are no further questions for this panel. So we are going, thank you all for coming today. We are going to go into panel 10. Yep, thank you all for coming. So I am looking for Rowan Wiebe. Rowan, are you with us here in person today? Coming up, okay, perfect. Online, do I have Zara Keleman?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great, just mute and then you will be second. Tyler Melnick. Okay, I will just wait. I'll go back to Tyler at the end. Heather McRae.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just looking. Okay, and what about, I'm just wondering, maybe is Asma Paveen here? Not yet. Okay, well, we're gonna start with this small group and then we will go from there. So Rowan Wiebe, go ahead.
This doesn't adjust. Hello, my name is Rowan Wiebe, and I'm president of the Alberta Asexuals and Aromantics, and I speak as a member of the asexual and aromantic community. We are far more likely to live on our own, and that makes housing very expensive since we don't have a partner to share our housing costs the way that other sexual orientations do. The single tax, as we call it, similar to the pink tax, is something that we live with every day on housing, groceries, and all manner of goods. This wasn't an accident, though. I'm a history major, so here's a fun fact about the community character so many people are defending. One of the reasons why city councils across North America feverishly banned boarding houses and apartment buildings post-World War II is because they were terrified of people living outside the nuclear family. 2 men could get an apartment together. A woman could live on her own. Scandalous. By only making more expensive single-family homes available, governments push people into respectable lifestyles. These archaic bylaws still stop people from living their lives, including perpetually single members of the asexual and aromantic community. Upzoning and higher density is essential to affordability for us. From the city's own data, the median price for a home that is 3 other homes on the same lot, a fourplex, sells for $585,000. A single-family home sells for a median price of $1.6 million. That's a dramatic difference for a single person's pocketbook. A lot of the focus here today has been on families, and rightfully so. There's a lot of families in this city. But a lot of the least house secure in this city are single people. 81% of those in housing need are single or 2-person households. This stat doesn't include the people who aren't forming households at all. People like me who would happily live on their own, but is staying with their dad to save money. Hi, Dad. This summer and fall, I was beset by fellow students moving to the city, often from abroad with no place to call home, desperate to find even a room. I have friends who live with queerphobic parents who cannot afford to move out, so suffer through daily misgenderings and other microaggressions. It's not bad enough that homelessness is worth it, but it's still not great. If a person doesn't have a safe place to call home, it affects every single thing in their lives. We need 40 to 50,000 homes. We need them now, and we need to remove the barriers that drive up prices. Uncertainty around the lengthy rezoning process, when 95% of applications are approved, adds to the cost of all housing, including affordable housing projects, which we need. Parking minimums drive up cost. Development fees that nickel and dime builders for building a public good drives up cost. This is a housing crisis that affects everybody, but it especially affects those who fall outside the bounds of proper families, who politicians often overlook. We need homes, we need them now, we need them everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. Zara, you are next.
Good afternoon, Community Development Committee, Mayor, and Council. My name is Zara Keleman, and I'm a resident of Calgary's Kensington area. Today I'm here to speak on item 7.1 on why I'm in favor of the City of Calgary's affordable housing strategy. Currently, I'm a student, and I've seen and experienced firsthand the impact of Calgary's housing crisis. For instance, students at the University of Calgary are seeking to live in on-campus accommodation in record numbers, according to the campus residences. As of last year, for the first time in 10 years, the campus housing has been full, and there's more than 700 applicants on the wait list. With the current housing crisis and rising cost of living, students are unable to afford rent as they were able to in previous years. The affordable housing strategy would be beneficial in assisting to address this problem. With the current zoning in the city, developers are only able to build single detached homes such as infills in desirable neighborhoods around Calgary. Currently, 68% of the land is zoned for single detached housing. The city should support Recommendation 1 as it would allow for more dense housing and more people to live in areas that they desire, while increasing the value of land at the same time. It should do so by allowing developers to build housing such as apartments, condos, or townhomes that would typically sell faster, as the price point of these types of housing is less than that of an infill. Even those who can afford a place to live sometimes spend more than half of their monthly salary on rentals. They thus have fewer funds available for savings as well as other necessities. Areas that are considered or viewed as unsafe to live in are caused by a shortage of affordable housing. Increased criminality, issues with the well-being of the general population, and detrimental economic effects on cities have been connected to higher rates of homelessness. By building affordable housing throughout the city, It allows those that may be struggling or currently unable to afford housing in majority of the areas to be spread out and eliminate the saturation of areas that may be viewed as dangerous or a less desirable neighborhood to live in. This would help to reduce those certain areas people avoid and even entice businesses and services to want to move or to develop in these areas. In response, this would also create more jobs and a stronger sense of community. This leads to why the city should be in favor of Recommendation 6 to enhance the housing options and services available to persons who are homeless or are struggling to afford their living situations. Creating more areas with affordable housing would also be beneficial to families and allow them to have more financial flexibility when considering the cost of living. Children's mental or behavioral issues have been proven to be correlated with poor or insecure housing. Children with a connection to secure and expensive housing also frequently have higher levels of educational advancement. Additionally, families have more opportunities to make investments in the development and future of their children's education when they are not required to spend the majority of their money on housing and necessities. Lastly, through Recommendation 5 of increasing the investment to support housing providers, enacting a bylaw and advocating to exempt properties from the municipal and provincial portion of property tax would not only keep homes more affordable, as well as entice already existing home builders and nonprofit organizations to continue to build affordable homes, but it would likely draw new builders in. This would allow affordable homes to be built more efficiently and get people into homes faster. Given the scope of Calgary and its 1.8% growth rate over the last year, whereby another significant amount of people are predicted to relocate in the following years, affordable housing is essential. The city is experiencing a housing crisis due to the rapid population expansion, and things won't get better until immediate action is taken. It's essential to achieve a more diversified and affordable housing selection of housing, not only for the people I know personally, but for my generation and for the future generations. This concludes my presentation, and I just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Zara, for coming to speak today. Heather.
Good afternoon, Chair Penner, Mayor Gondak, and Council. My name is Heather McRae. I am a Ward 7 resident and Director of Communications for the Calgary Downtown Association, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Calgary Downtown Association has submitted a letter recommending approval of the housing and affordability recommendations, and I trust that is in your packages. As we have already heard from the Calgary Chamber of Commerce and Calgary Economic Development on the benefits of the recommendations for our business community and the economic health of our city, I will not belabor their well-articulated positions. I have wrestled today with what pearl of wisdom I can leverage to inspire you to vote in favor of the recommendations before you. I am not an expert on the subject, but you have expert recommendations, and logic suggests that you should follow their recommendations to ensure our city has a rich diversity in housing options in all communities, something that we hear consistently is critical to our city's future. I am, however, a parent of young adults and am witness to the challenges facing young professionals in finding affordable housing today. I am the daughter of a 92-year-old mother living on a fixed income, and I know that we will see an explosion of seniors in the coming years seeking a variety of housing options. I am here today as a community member imploring you to vote in the best interests of our city as a whole, which means voting yes to the Housing and Affordability Task Force recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, so much. I'm just going to call a couple other names. Sonja Johnson.
Oh, yes, perfect. I'm here. I was just going to say I'm here.
Okay, Sonja, just hold on for 1 second. And Tyler Melnick. Not yet. Okay, Sonja, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Council, my name is Sonja Johnson. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of Calgary's housing strategy and the Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations. I'd like to start with a quote from Larry Beardsley, former planning director of the City of Vancouver. A city is the most complex invention of the human mind, an organism in a constant state of transformation. Transformation has come, and we can be sure that more is on the way. Housing affordability should never have been ignored, yet all levels of government have made decisions that have now landed us in this housing crisis. Recommendations on affordability were brought to Council 7 years ago with little uptake, and so it is back before you again, and this time the issue is more urgent than ever. Housing affordability cannot be kicked down the road to future councils or be relegated to a pilot project promising action later. The time to act is now. Cities are meant to, at minimum, provide citizens with their basic needs. Housing is a basic need that is currently not being met for many Calgarians. Having all Calgarians' basic needs met makes life better for all Calgarians. Until we all live in dignity, none of us do. The recommendations put forth by the Housing Affordability Task Force will put Calgary on a path where the basic needs of housing can be met for all Calgarians. Are the recommendations a silver bullet? No. Will there be bumps along the way? Sure. But when has that ever been a reason not to take bold action? And by bold, I mean changing outdated and exclusionary zoning rules that are relics of the 1950s. The world has changed, and our cities must rise to the challenges these changes present. More flexibility in housing increases the supply, thus increasing affordability, not to mention sustainability and climate resiliency. Flexibility in housing is aided by progressive changes in zoning. Since no one action will be a silver bullet, we need all the recommended actions. Outcome 2, Action 2B, may be the most powerful recommendation in the HATF. I quote, contravene a group of partners in the housing sector to collaborate, create awareness, identify innovative collaborative opportunities. Yes, let's bring people with different perspectives from different industries and backgrounds together. Huge problems like housing affordability require a team effort. Calgary can do this. We must do this. And by Calgary, I include us, the citizens. We need to do our part too, and we will help you. But we've elected you to be our leaders and to make the tough decisions we elected you to make, using the experts at your disposal. Decisions that impact the lives of all, and I emphasize all Calgarians, present and future. We elected you to look at the big picture and make bold, perhaps politically unpopular decisions for the greater good. And may I note, bold appears to be a theme today, I've noticed, listening to speakers. Taking no definitive action on housing leaves many people with little hope. Action, your action, will give citizens a sense of power and, more importantly, a sense of possibility. Give current and future Calgarians this hope and allow them to see the possibilities. Please accept the recommendations of the HATF. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonja, for being here with us today. I will just give my colleagues a second in case they want to put any questions in the questions. Once, twice, 3 times. Okay, seeing none, thank you so much to Rowan, Zara, Heather, and Sonja for making up this panel. Just so everyone is following along and you're wondering what panel we are at, we are on panel 11. And I will call those 5 names, and then I will call for panel 12 just to be sort of in the waiting. So Karen Ball, Jocelyn Keith-Asante, Asma Pavine, Ryan Anderson, and Vincent St. Pierre. You are all panel 11, and you can make your way towards the podium. Panel 12, which will be following, is Larry Dunlop, Andrea Riccio, Mateusz Salmassi, I butchered it, didn't I? And Gordon Lamb, and Siraaj Shah. Mateusz, I'll work on it. Is that better? Yeah, so good. Okay, Karen, you are first.
Good afternoon, Councillor Penner, members of council. Thank you for the time to speak today. My name is Karen Ball. I am the president and CEO of the Calgary Chamber of Voluntary Organizations, CCVO, your nonprofit chamber. I have copies of letters for clerks to please distribute, which is an update of the letter that we sent to you earlier with ongoing and continued signature submissions. Nonprofits understand that complex issues like housing and the affordability crisis that we are facing in Calgary and in many other places cannot be solved by one government, one organization, one individual, or one company. Nonprofits have done and continue to do our part, serving on the front lines during the pandemic and continuing to support people and communities who are struggling under the weight of an increasingly unaffordable city. I'm here today on behalf of 93 nonprofit organizations, their staff, and the people and communities they serve, representing thousands of Calgarians who need you to do everything you can to solve the housing problem through approving the Home is Here, City of Calgary housing strategy. We encourage you to be strategic by taking action that leverages supports from the provincial and federal governments and your nonprofit partners. As employers for one of Alberta's largest sectors, with a labor force larger than oil and gas, forestry, and mining combined, we understand how vital it is that we do not delay action on affordability. Employees in our sector face growing vulnerability. The nonprofit sector employs 1 in 20 Albertans. We are 78% women and 47% immigrants. Our average salary is just over $51,000 a year, and that includes salaries for people working within nonprofits such as universities and municipalities like the City of Calgary. Our average wage is 15% lower than the Alberta all-sector average and almost 40% lower than what we need to afford average market rent in Calgary. Our nonprofit employees are not just at risk, they're hurting as we speak. We've heard from many nonprofits here today with some truly heartbreaking stories. In putting together our submission, we heard from sport and arts organizations that provide programming for vulnerable youth that see the impacts of the housing crisis firsthand on the young people they serve. Organizations that work with trans and gender diverse individuals, many of whom are experiencing houselessness or are precariously housed. Organizations working on climate change that understand housing addresses the broader spectrum of needs from health to environmental values. And countless frontline service providers that are seeing steep increases in demands for their services due to the rising cost of housing, such as animal shelters, as people are forced to surrender their pets in order to find a place to live, food banks that are serving a growing number of people who are having to choose between food and housing, domestic violence shelters, and transitional housing providers whose families cannot afford to move from shelter spaces and who are faced with unprecedented growing wait lists. We're trying to serve this expanding demand while being unable to attract and retain essential staff. We cannot have a thriving nonprofit sector and ultimately a thriving Calgary if workers cannot afford to live here. Immediate action must be taken to ensure that Calgary is affordable for decades to come because no one, and not even the most wealthy among us, want to live in a city where caregivers, artists, coaches, educators, and essential service providers just can't afford to live.
Karen, 1 sec. Karen, I will give you those seconds. Just a reminder, if you are online, if you could just make sure your phone is muted while presenters are here. Go ahead, continue, Karen.
Thank you, Councillor Penner. Nonprofits address complex social problems to build a better world. That's what we do. We know that bold actions can be necessary. Affordability is a complex problem. And on behalf of the 93 leading nonprofit organizations, which I'll tell you is extraordinarily high for a letter of this type, we encourage you to be bold today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Jocelyn.
Good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm Jocelyn Keith-Asante, a volunteer with the Calgary Alliance for the Common Goods Truth and Reconciliation Research Action Team, and a congregant of the member organization, the Unitarian Church of Calgary, speaking in favor of the Council's recommendations to increase available affordable housing and housing in general as soon as possible. A bit of history. When some World War II veterans returned to Canada from the war, they were housed and paid to go to university, which is how intergenerational wealth was created in the white and white-passing Canadian population. Indigenous veterans were ignored, lost status, and were treated as less than human. People of the global majority of Canada were treated poorly because of racism and still are. Just try to rent an apartment if you're an Indigenous or a person of the global majority. It can be demoralizing and has not changed. Racism is still a major factor. I benefited greatly from the federal government's housing and school support for my father and his young family. The most courageous member of Dad's platoon was not housed and schooled when he returned to Canada. As an Indigenous man, he lost status, suffered greatly, and died of exposure in a parking lot in Prince George in the 1980s, 30 years before my father died. A few notes from a couple of articles I was looking at. Before the 1990s, the federal government played a major role in the provision of affordable housing in Canada, partnering with provincial and housing agencies to build tens of thousands of units of affordable housing annually across the country. Today, there are over 600,000 units of social housing across Canada, the majority being built between World War II and 1990s. The federal government support was reduced to almost zero by consecutive Conservative and Liberal governments by 1996, precipitated by the recession of the 1980s and 90s. But the expenditures cleared from the government's balance sheet soon appeared at the local and provincial level in the form of exploding health and social service costs. When the homelessness crisis appeared in the late 1990s, leading Canada's researchers in Canada correlate the beginning of the homelessness crisis in Canada to the massive federal government cuts to affordable housing provision in the 1990s and the welfare cutback that followed. Since 1996, the ineffective re-entry of the federal government by either Liberals or Conservatives into social housing since the 1990s has led to the housing crisis in Calgary today. Until the federal government once again becomes a major partner in social housing across Canada, the City of Calgary must do what it can to improve this dire situation. Much immigration to Canada occurred between World War II and the 1990s. These immigrants benefited from the federal government's strong presence in social housing. If your family immigrated to Calgary during this time, you had an advantage over those who have arrived here since then, when federal government supported social housing ended and more people were arriving to the same limited supply of social housing. However, some say that when their predecessors came to Canada, they were solely responsible for their successes. Don't forget that Canada supported immigration with available affordable housing, which is a requirement when starting out in a new country, learning a new language and customs. Of course, hard work and perseverance is also required, but we forget how many supports were already in place. All council needs to vote for these recommendations and stop protecting their NIMBY constituents and densify our neighborhoods with affordable housing now. We want Indigenous and other equity-deserving peoples to succeed when they live in Calgary. We want immigrants to succeed when they build a life in Calgary. We also want our children to succeed when they start their new lives here. The City of Calgary must now be creative and forward-looking to make more affordable housing. Stop protecting the wealthy. Make all neighborhoods inclusive and denser. The 50s and 60s are over. There is a housing crisis in Calgary now. We need to look at our history to see how we got here and do what we can now to turn the tide of looming homelessness and increasing poverty by recreating the dynamic team of federal, provincial, and municipal governments working together as they did for 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Asma. Is Asma Pavine with us yet? Not yet? Okay. Ryan.
Sorry, Asma said that she had to, because of, well, she had to work today to afford housing, was not able to be here today, so.
Okay, if Asma would like, if you have, or Asma, if you were listening in the universe, we can get Asma back onto the speakers list, hopefully either later tonight or tomorrow, so.
Okay, well, I'll reach out to her and let her know then.
Thank you.
So hello, my name is Ryan Anderson. I am the lead organizer for the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good, which is an alliance of 27 different faith, labor, ethnocultural, educational, and nonprofit organizations that came together to build a more just and compassionate city. Last year, we had a listening campaign, and we listened to our members, and what we heard clearly was that the rising cost of housing exceeding people's increases in wages was one of the most important and pressing issues that were impacting Calgarians. Unfortunately, many of them who are members are actually working today and thus cannot be here to speak. So with our scarves and with our rally, we are lifting up their voices. But I want to leave with you a few images. These images are from my own experience and perspective, but reflect what we heard from our members. The first image that I want to I was banned from showing this up there. Actually, sorry, I have some slides if they're able to put them up. Well, the very first image, I was banned from putting it up there, is actually my children. Because my children, like I am a parent, and many of our members are parents and grandparents. And what are the, oh no, that's okay. My parents are very concerned that their children will not be able to build a life in our city. If RCG zoning means that when my kids are actually raising their kids, that I can actually walk or take a bus to help them out, then I say, let's bring it on. The next image, actually, Vincent, can you stand up? Oh. Since I don't have the picture, we'll use the person.
We are getting your presentation up, just clerks is coming, but.
Okay, there you go. Next slide. There you go. There's Vincent and Elise. These are brilliant, talented people. But as the lead organizer, I'm responsible for staff. And like many of our organizations that serve their communities, we are deeply concerned when we hear about these wonderful people who are seeing 15 to 25% rent increases. How can we retain and attract wonderfully talented people, especially if you're in organizations that don't have the finances to be able to increase wages at the same rate? Next image, please. This is a graph that is showing the increase in disposable income adjusted for inflation versus the cost of housing. And actually, it's a little bit deceptive because when we talk to our labor people, they only dream of keeping up with inflation. So for most people who are working, that bottom line is actually going down. And it is that gap that you're seeing at the end is the pressure that our communities are under and our families are under. And we are seeing it. We're seeing it in increased mental health issues. We are seeing it in our schools. We're seeing it in decreased participation in our communities. And tragically, the other day, I also heard about how we are seeing it in our back alleys as well. The other image I want to leave with you is this. See, I am also the Reverend Ryan Anderson. I am a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada, one of our member organizations. We have many faith organizations that are a part of our membership, and also organizations with deep values. And one of the values that we share together is that our public life and our public leaders and anyone who takes on public responsibility, there is one criteria above all others that we are judged by, and that is how our actions and decisions impact those who are the least, the last, and the lost of our communities. So I'm calling on council to have moral courage, have the moral courage of mature public leaders who can take bold action to look after those who are struggling in our communities. Pass the strategy, but also begin the hard and important work of implementing them and ensuring along the way that we are building affordable housing that people can not only afford, but also those who need it most can access. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. Vincent.
Oh, that didn't work. For the clerk team, if you could pull up my slides, I'd be much obliged. It's counting down already. Oh, thank you. Oh, every second counts. It's a rare occasion to be able to speak in front of council, and I count myself lucky. Mayor Gondek, councilors, my representative, Councillor Wong in Ward 7. By the by, we're in Ward 7 right now, so welcome to the neighborhood. I am a proud resident, volunteer, and board member with the Downtown Core Neighborhood Association. So, because of all my colleagues on the board can't make it because they're at work, I get to come. So you get to hear from me Next slide, please. So, please vote in favor of accepting the Housing Affordability Task Force recommendations. Next slide. Let me tell you about my neighborhood. Next slide. So, these are some photos from recent events. You'll see the Whalen Theater. You can also see, maybe, if you look really close, Councillor Walcott for attending there last week. We had about 120 cyclists from Bike Calgary and a good bunch of our own neighbors to get together to talk about how we shape and form our cities, how we create a better space for those who, well, so that all can belong here. Bottom left, you can't see him, but Councillor Wong's in there in that mess in the middle. I tried to get a good photo of him at it, but he was just talking to too many people. It's one of the problems of being a politician. But we host these events, and these are just in the last year or so, where we open and include and involve folks from a community that is under-resourced, underserved, and has expectations of its public leaders. And those expectations is making good policy for the long term to benefit as many Calgarians as possible. And we also partner with so many different institutions, Knox United with our Neighbor Day 2023, Volley and the good folks at Good Neighbor over with our second annual community garage sale. It makes for fun times. But in every single event we've hosted, housing, its precarity, its affordability have come up time and time and time again. And it's hard and it's difficult. Next slide, please. So I volunteer with residents belonging to the downtown core. We're the most vibrant community in Calgary, the downtown core. We're pretty great. 8,500 plus residents, 1 out of 10 are under the age of 14, 47% immigrant background, average income of about 54 grand, 37% of households spend more than 30% of monthly income on housing. Problem. Those stats are from the last community survey in 2016. We've had COVID since. We've had this inflation crisis since. We've had a rapid increase of prices across the scale on top of inflation, targeted mostly at those struggling the most. And it's a problematic problem because, well, next slide, please. That last bullet's important. There are folks who are struggling in my neighborhood, in my community, and it is rough going. People are looking at rents doubling. In my building alone, just in front of Century Gardens, I got in at $1,050 per month 3 years ago. Pretty good rent, 440 square feet. Not that bad. I'm a single dude out on the town. I ain't need that much square footage. Problem, new tenants coming into the building. They're paying $2,300 a month. That's absurd. And I counted myself lucky that I only had a 15-point increase on the 1st of September of this year. So I'm now paying $1,216 a month. Don't panic. It's okay. I can manage. But a 15-point increase, and fully expecting I'm going to get another 15-point increase next year, because these solutions presented in front of us today, do they come in packed now? Do they come in packed tomorrow? Should they be passed immediately? No. What it's done is through the leadership and good policy of our leaders around this chamber today. Next slide, please. So you've seen the stats. Complaints, my 15% increase on the 1st. That's rough. Next slide. Each of the 5 surveys, it's been time and time, topic and top it again, and it's top of mind for our neighbors. So please, next slide, vote in favor of the recommendations in full as quickly as possible so the real work can get beginning, because it's so important now that we take action more than ever. So thank you, everyone. My name is Vincent St. Pierre. I'm a happy volunteer with the Downtown Core Neighborhood Association, currently in the midst of a housing crisis. Please vote yes.
Thank you, Vincent. Just waiting. I do not see any questions at this panel. Thank you all for joining us today. In particular, Jocelyn, I appreciated history and statistics going together. Great to nerd out on that. Thank you so much all. We are going to move to panel 13 before the dinner hour, and then we will resume we're moving to panel 12 before the dinner hour. I saw the looks of confusion. Thank you all. And then we will resume with panel 13 after dinner. So panel 12 is Larry Dunlop, Andrea Riccio, Mateusz, we're just gonna go there, Gordon Lamb, and Siraaj Shah. So you are all on this panel. After the dinner hour, if you are here or I think everyone is here, or maybe not quite, it'll be Isabella Rodriguez Pinedo, Nathaniel Schmidt, Joseph Wynn, Leslie Hill, and Prabjit Grual. So that will be who is panel 13, and that will be after we're back at the dinner hour, and we will go there. Larry, you are first. Larry Dunlop.
Good afternoon, Mayor Gondek, council members. My name is Larry Dunlop. I've been here just about 40 years, 4 houses, 2 divorces, still here. I commend Mayor Gondek for spearheading Saturday's meeting. It reminds me of former Ralph Klein, who I think that's the reason that I stayed. Please bear with me. Please excuse my ignorance of protocol, as this is my first time addressing council. I have never felt the need before, because council has seemed to have worked for me for almost 40 years. And public speaking is not my forte. It's actually one of my hidden disabilities. I need to mention 2 recent articles by CBC reporter and producer Karina Zapata. I'm sure a few of you are familiar with her. August 29th, she wrote a grassroots group called Arise, something that I don't know anything about, I haven't researched, but it has to do with people that are on AISH. So I'll be checking that sometime later. She commented that Alberta has the highest benefits in the country of $1,787 maximum monthly. So I contacted her. We've been talking back and forth. If it sounds like I'm going off topic, please grant me some leeway. I'll tie it all together in the end. On the 29th, following day, she reported an average 1-bedroom apartment is $1,718. Not a lot of wiggle room there. Now, the research that I've done, housing, shelter, well, that's not rent. On top of your rent, you're going to have your electricity, your gas, heat, hot water possibly, internet, because we live in that age. So 30% of your shelter, of your gross income, you can apply for affordable housing. And affordable housing's been in the news quite a lot lately. But one thing that I fail to see in the news is low-income housing, which, unfortunately, that's where I am right now. And the less than $100, how do I live? I'm on AISH. I'm on multiple wait lists. I have been for most of this year. I'm 60 years old, so I'm applying for 55 plus subsidized housing. I did find one about 3 weeks ago. I found it with Rent Faster. CHC is familiar with Rent Faster. Contacted the landlord, got a form back. Part of that is a credit report, which mine is going to be 0. Like I said, 2 divorces. The other part of the disclaimer was by filling out this form, accept it or not, you will be removed from the CHC wait list. Doesn't take a genius to figure out not filling out that form. So if I were getting the maximum on AISH, which is $1,878, I think it was, so that would take it down to, what, about $600 a month. And then from that, I got a chance of being able to pay bills. I'm still gonna struggle, but at least I've got the opportunity.
Larry.
I do not drive anymore, medically.
Larry, I'm so sorry, but your 5 minutes is up.
Really?
I know, it goes so quickly.
Oh, didn't even get into Minister Nixon. Thank you all for your time.
We'll save that for the next time you come back, I guess.
You have my email address.
Andrea Riccio.
Good afternoon. It's Andrea, like Bocelli. But I don't have his voice.
It is, and my apologies.
No need to apologize. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Riccio, and I live in Ward 2 in Hawkwood. But I grew up in Ward 9 in the community of Renfrew, which you've heard a lot about today. I fully support the adoption of the housing strategy and support the implementation of base RCG zoning and the removal of parking minimums. These are essential policy changes needed to ensure that we continue to attract the best and brightest to our city. My parents were immigrants to this great city. My father was a construction worker. But we lived next door to a professional couple that worked in oil and gas downtown. But I can't help but think that if my parents immigrated today, they probably wouldn't be able to afford to live next door to that professional couple that became our lifelong friends. Today, there are few affordable housing options for working-class households in established communities. And these families, as you've heard often today, have been displaced to less expensive suburbs where the advantage gain, the financial gain change from living in a cheaper neighborhood is offset by the higher transportation costs incurred to get to work and other amenities. Now, I believe that anyone who works and contributes to the city should be able to live and work and play wherever they choose, and not be restricted by outdated land use regulations that no longer reflect the needs of today's Calgarians. Single-family zoning may have made sense decades ago when families were fewer and larger, but they don't make sense in today's changing demographics, which today includes smaller families, single-parent families, more people living alone, including seniors. We need that greater mix of housing throughout the city, and if the market is not allowed to meet this demand, both in terms of type and location, then the price of this type of housing will continue to rise, causing these demographics to seek housing elsewhere. And many will take their skills with them. And the companies that want them will follow them wherever they go. So if we want to keep those investment dollars in Calgary, and if that means no parking minimums and allowing all types of housing, then we need to do it. And we need to do it now. Now, it is understandable that there's a significant opposition to the housing strategy and to higher density in general. Residents want to protect the character of their neighborhoods and financial investments. I get it. But in many of these inner city communities, the lots could accommodate greater density without negatively impacting the communities. Adding more affordable housing to all communities won't make them crime-infested slums. What they will be populated with is hardworking people like my parents, who are really good neighbors. We have to weigh the costs and the benefits of these policies all the time. Not we, you. And ask ourselves, what harm does a 3-story building 20 feet away from my patio really cause, when you have to weigh it against the impacts that you've heard about inadequate housing and the impact financially on our city? Yes, the goal is to bring the cost of housing down, and that will lower property values. But guess what? Since I built my house, it has appreciated 300%. A correction is not going to put my family in the poorhouse. And the benefit is giving a leg up to Calgarians who need it. And that's a cost I'm willing to bear. Thirdly, these changes aren't going to happen overnight. It's going to take years for the market to respond to the land use changes as properties are sold in communities over time. And lastly, we've heard a lot about democracy, and democracy is important, but it should mean that all Canadians have a say in how all communities in this city evolve. Our votes and our tax dollars are all the same. But when we give voice only to those who have the money to live in certain neighborhoods, I hardly call that democracy. So when more Calgarians can fully participate in all communities, as workers, as consumers, as our neighbors, and as citizens, that's good for everyone. And voters will reward councillors who get that.
Thank you, Andrea, for being here today. Your 5 minutes is up, and you can just have a seat until we get to questions. Mateusz.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. My name is Mateusz Salmassi, and I'm the Vice President External of the Students' Union at the University of Calgary, where I represent over 29,000 undergraduate students. I'm an international student. I've struggled with housing. I'm someone who wants to become a permanent resident here in Canada. I'm planning my future here in Calgary, and it's why I chose the University of Calgary. We've seen the promises for student housing proposed by Mayor Gondek this week. Of course, we are more than in favor of them. But let me be clear, just like our degrees, student housing is only the start. We cannot afford to be so short-sighted by only focusing on just those next few years. That's why we wholeheartedly support every single one of these 33 housing affordability recommendations. When I first started my degree, my best option was an overcrowded, mice-infested room in a basement. My last landlord was caught by a health inspector trying to rent me an asbestos-ridden rental. I couch surfed for nearly a month, and all I got for that was a slight refund on my rent for that month. These are the options for students, and we know they aren't going to magically improve once we graduate. We know that many of you support some or even most of the 33 of these recommendations, but we're here to advocate on passing all of them because we trust the task force of experts that you appointed. We need to pass the blanket zoning recommendation now and begin implementing it. We all seem to agree that creating new subsidies and incentives to build affordable housing is crucial, but you can place all the taxpayer money in the world into subsidies and incentives. That money is just going to sit there if you don't remove the regulations that prevent those homes from actually being built in the first place. Subsidies are not a starting point. They're an accelerator. Otherwise, we're leaving in place a process that takes far too long to build new housing, which is exactly how we got into this housing crisis in the first place. Here's what RCG zoning actually means for average Calgarians. You can build more housing on the same plot of land. Here's what RCG doesn't mean. That as soon as this vote passes, immediately, giant, ugly skyscrapers are going to be built right next door. It means we can build more units, more affordable housing, more quickly in the middle of an emergency. Because what's our alternative? Changing zoning a couple wards at a time, making piecemeal change that takes forever while we're in the middle of a crisis? RCG is one of the tools we have here that gives us as many avenues as possible to build our way out of this. RCG is not an immediate solution. That's why it's only one of 33 recommendations. But RCG prevents us from ever getting back into this mess in the first place. When a civil engineering student is living in his car, when an international student is on the verge of homelessness in a new country where they're alone and have no one to turn to, when a business student is living with 15 people in a small, damp house, what happens then? Your children, your grandchildren, and future Calgarians that aren't able to live here yet are depending on you to make the right decision today. On Saturday, don't kill all 33 of these recommendations that were produced by your own experts just because you take issue with 3% of them. You were elected to do the right thing. The entire country is watching. What are you going to do? Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon.
Can I speak with my slide?
Yeah, if you just give us a second, we'll get it up for you, and then once it's up, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Go
My
ahead.
name is Gordon Lam. Thank you for giving me time to speak here. I declare that I don't represent any association or corporations. I speak out here because I believe Calgarians are good people, and I love this place. Slide 2, please. There are about 81,000 households that need affordable housing. However, the city's plan mentioned that we can build around a maximum of 3,000 new affordable housing per year, and facing the pressure to push back from the Nubians. Are there any measures to speed up the building's progress to solve the crisis? Next page, please. Yes, our senior had tackled a similar housing shortage issue in their time. In past, the responsibility and motivation pushed them to step out of their comfort zone and figure out how to solve the problem. They were braver and embraced the innovative construction method of their era. What can we learn from them? Please skip slide 4 to 6 because I have enough time. Next page. Next. Next piece. Yes. Responsibility and motivation are the foundation of the 6 recommendations. We know that the recommendations are good, but the most essential element is the people appointed to deliver the project. How can we know the roles and responsibility of each project participant and which one has completed their job on time? We can foresee that the council and the city department will bear three times workload on housing subjects, and we plan to build more 3 times housing. But they are also required to handle the other routine work at the same period. It might cause a bottleneck in the projects. It might cause conflicting responsibility and a lack of motivation between the council and the department because the workload will be more overwhelming than they can afford with their on-hand resources. Next slide. My suggestion 1 is employ project manager and use responsibility assignment matrix. A famously experienced project manager that he completed similar large-scale affordable housing project. The city dedicated him as a representative with the authority to plan and approve the building permits directly to share the workload. He will be a competent person to implement our projects. Next. The responsibility assignment matrix gives you a clear picture of the tasks on which participants should get things done. All participants and public can be more easily persuaded and believe the talks can be completed at the right time and pace as planned. Next, please. My suggestion 2, use modern construction technology, building information modeling and modular construction to speed up the building progress. Please, next, please. A HM government's document mentioned that the widespread adoption of BIM is therefore a significant tool for the government to reach its target of 15 to 30% saving on the cost of capital project by 2015. Next, please. And according to the studies of Canada Mortgage and Housing Corp, the modular construction is energy efficiency, a cost-effective way, and can be up to 50% faster than the traditional builds. Next, please. My suggestion 3 is we promote having the neighborhood collective policy and update the project title to remote our community, erect your own small business in your homes to the communities. Next, please. Have you figured out what is the rationale for visiting the change? I have interviewed some Calgarians and asked for their comments on the topic. Most admit that we are facing the housing crisis in Calgary and are worried the problem will worsen. They thought the change was almost provide nothing beneficial for them. So I suggest we promote update the project title to remote our community, erect your own small business in your house. Because of both interviewer, we pointed that they thought the policy is good, encourage them to accept the change after they knew the details. As the policy encouraged the locals to start their small business with their family, and it can be an asset for their families, the locals may change their attitude toward the new neighborhoods as they constantly bring in income for their family and share the beneficial coming from the change.
Gordon, I just thank you for being with us today. Your 5 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Siraaj.
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Siraaj Shah. I'm a third-year international relations student at the University of Calgary. I'm also the youngest licensed realtor in the city of Calgary, and I've been practicing for 2 years as a realtor. Now, let me tell you a fun fact. Each and every single property that I have sold since I started 2 years ago, each and every single property has been sold at or above list price, myself, personally. That's not a small fact. Each and every single property that I have sold has gone above list price. Now, what does this tell you? What does this indicate to you? It indicates to you that we are not just in an affordability crisis for those who are marginalized. We're not just in an affordability crisis for those who do not have the means or the capabilities. We are in an affordability crisis, a housing affordability crisis for each and every single Calgarian. The Calgarian who is working 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. We are in a crisis for that particular Calgarian. And so that is why here today I would like to advocate to City Council to say yes to each and every single one of the recommendations promoted by the Housing Affordability Task Force. And the reasons for that are simple. The first, specifically when it comes to the zoning issue, is that it is actually better for the consumer, first and foremost. Because for the consumer, it provides them a variety of options. It provides the consumer, the one who is going in to purchasing their first property, it provides them a variety of options. These options are such that it enables them to look beyond the bucks. Most of my buyers and most of my clients are purchasing between $400,000 and $600,000. And within that margin, oftentimes we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 offers on a property. And the reason for that is simple. It's because they don't have any other option. Their only options are either townhomes that are very low in supply or single-family detached homes that are also low in supply. And so the key here is to enable these individuals to have options for affordable housing around the city that they can purchase and get into. That is the first aspect. The second aspect is that by implementing some of these zoning changes, we actually benefit developers and investors within the city of Calgary. And the reason for that is simple. Developers, the only people who are building housing are not just developers. We have investors around the city, individuals who have worked their entire lives who are putting their money into properties that they want to invest for their grandchildren. And so for these individuals, what are their options? Their options are either to build expensive infills within the inner cities or to keep their money on their own and invest in another place. And so these are the individuals that we have to incentivize. We have to incentivize these individuals to build housing within the city of Calgary, to allow them and enable them to have the opportunity to build denser housing that is not only beneficial for themselves, but also for each and every single Calgarian around them. And so that is why I would advocate to City Council to take a deep look at some of these housing affordability recommendations and realize and understand the fact that we are sitting in an affordability crisis that will not stop unless we take action now. I'm 20 years old. And with the state of the housing market that it is right now, as a real estate professional, I'm worried. I'm worried not just for myself. I'm worried for my future kids, my grandkids, my future generations. And I'm worried because I know for a fact that over the next 5-10 years, it'll be difficult for me personally to afford a place to live. For me personally, as a real estate professional. And so that is why it is imperative for us to not only focus on now, but also for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And the last thing that I'll give to City Council is that I'm a Muslim. And one of the issues that we face, and I'm not quite sure we have touched this in the affordability recommendations, is that many Muslims are against the idea of buying places on interest. And so that leaves them in a very tight scenario where they either have the option to rent, and many of them have rented for 20, 30, 40 years and are now in a crisis because they have families and they cannot afford rent. Or the other option is to go against their faith and to purchase a property off of interest in an affordability crisis. And so it is imperative for City Council to look at some of these marginalized communities and ask yourself, what are the issues that these communities are facing and what are the steps that we can take to ensure that some of the barriers that exist are lifted? That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Siraaj. I love learning so many different things about all the different kind of people that make up the fabric of our city for that quilt zoning. Councillor Walcott, you're first.
Larry, I have to ask the question. I gotta know. I gotta find out what happened with your comments on Nixon, so please, fill me in.
I didn't fully hear that.
I wanted to know desperately where you were going, for better or for worse, about your comments around Minister Nixon and social housing, and so I wanted to give you an opportunity.
Thank you very much. I sent an email about affordable housing and homelessness to a dozen ministers and councillors, including Mayor Gondak herself. Received no response. Sent a second one about 3 weeks later. No response again, except from Minister Nixon. That was CC'd to Daniel Smith only. But he's the Minister of Senior Community Social Services. I'm only 60, so I had to end the email conversation as it would not fit in his portfolio per se.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions of this panel. Thank you all for spending some time with us here today. Council, it is 5:58, which brings us to our generally scheduled dinner hour. And so I'm going to recommend, Mayor Gondak, are you trying to put in an RTS? Oh, okay. It's like usually like right before the hour and everyone starts typing. Okay, committee, I'm going to recommend that we take 45 minutes. So that would bring us back here at 6:45. We will come back with panel 13, Isabella, Nathaniel, Joseph, Leslie, Prabhjit, and we will continue on with the evening. So 6:45 back here. We will see you then.